There's been a number of actually fascinating recent studies of one in the last year or two is where they found that the structure of the brains of participants in an 8-week mindfulness training program, the brains changed with an average of just 27 minutes of meditation a day. So physically, the brain changed. The brains of the meditators showed an increasing gray matter density in areas of the brain associated with memory, with self-awareness, with compassion, and with introspection. So the brain itself thickened in those areas, and that's a good thing, to thicken in those areas. And there was a decrease in density of gray matter in areas associated with stress and anxiety. So in just an 8-week period, in less than half an hour of practice a day, physical changes in the brains of meditators. Now, they'd found this in Tibetan Buddhist monks who had 10,000 hours of meditation. And it's kind of the Olympic athletes of the meditation world. And you could say, oh, not such a big surprise if you're going to do that much meditation. You know, it'll change your brain and probably your bum as well from sitting on the cushion all that time. But just in 8 weeks and less than half an hour a day, the brains of meditators, of practitioners changed. So the brain is plastic, it's changing. And one of the reasons why it's good that our brains can change is that we've inherited these brains through evolution. These brains, I assume most people here believe in evolution. And anyway, if you don't, that's fine too. But I'm going to posit that our brains have developed over millions of years through evolution, and that we actually have this three-part, not my theory obviously, but this three-part brain that's part reptilian, part old mammal brain, and part new mammal brain. And that this changed, I won't go into too much of detail around it tonight, just for reasons of time. But I will refer you to a wonderful book by Rick Hanson, some of you may know, called Buddha's Brain. Very, very interesting on this whole question of Buddhism, Buddhist teachings, and neuroscience, and kind of the convergence between them. But one of the things, you know, he and others, neuroscientists and psychologists, are saying that we've inherited these brains through evolution that obviously can do marvelous things, you know, that can invent, you know, wonderful poetry and build incredible buildings and wonders of the world. But the brain also gets us in trouble. You may have seen it with your own model. And one of the reasons for this is that our brains, or one of the things our brain does, is it has a negative bias. Here's why. Our brains evolved, our ancestors evolved, both kind of from the reptilian to the mammalian to our human ancestors. We evolved in dangerous neighborhoods. And in order to survive, our ancestors, you know, both our animal ancestors and human ancestors, had to be really on the lookout for what was negative. You know, it was at a premium. You know, I just imagine a scenario, a cartoon of a couple of people on the Serengeti plain, you know, 100,000 years ago or whatever, and there's a sound coming out of, you know, from a distance away. You know, there may be two people, you know, there. The one who took that as a message of like, uh-oh, this could be trouble, and ran away as fast as they could, was more likely to pass on their genes than the one that, you know, continued to chill out and, oh, it's probably nothing, you know, and then the tiger jumps out on them. So our brains, you know, were really selected for vigilance, for being on the lookout for the negative, much more than being on the lookout for the positive. as Rick Hansen puts it in his book, if we didn't get the meal or the opportunity to mate, well, maybe that'll come tomorrow or next week or next year. But there's time for that. But if we didn't respond to the threat to our survival in real time, then we wouldn't have a chance to tomorrow, next day, to have the meal or the opportunity to mate. So our brains really, the brains we've inherited, are really primed for the negative. Here are some examples of that. As Rick Hansen puts it, he says, it's the negative experience, not the positive ones, that have generally had the most impact on our survival. So some of the ways that our brains get us in trouble is, firstly, this bias towards the negative. Some examples: bad emotions, bad parents, bad feedback have more impact than good parents, emotions, and feedback. We're much more likely to be affected by negative experiences in those areas. And bad information, negative information, is processed more thoroughly than good information. Negative information weighs more heavily on the brain. We have the brain typically detects negative information faster than it detects positive information. Again, it's like we're on the lookout. The brain we've inherited through evolution is on the lookout for the negative, and it processes much more quickly the negative information than the positive information. For example, fearful faces are perceived much more quickly than happy or neutral ones. If we see a scary face, we're aware of that more quickly than a happy, smiling face or a more neutral face. Negative experiences have more high-priority storage. When an event is flagged as negative, a part of the brain known as the hippocampus makes sure it's stored for future reference, which isn't the same as with positive information. So the negative, we have this ways of remembering, ways of processing more quickly the negative information. The way Hansen puts it, he says, your brain is like Velcro for negative experiences and Teflon for positive ones. So it's like we glom onto the negative, and the positive kind of can, come off us like water off a duck's back. So it's important that we cultivate the positive, that we take it in, that we nurture it, that we balance this tendency of the mind to focus on the negative. We can see this focus on the negative in the ways that we can incorporate stress into our lives. We have this fight or flight mechanism, which is part of this kind of negative response. It's a great mode of the brain and the nervous system that when something is threatening, we can react immediately to it. Kind of if some vehicle's coming at us quickly, we can dive out of the way without having to kind of, what shall I do here? Shall I, there's this automatically we'll take the steps we need to take. But because of the brains that have developed, including the reptilian and the old mammal brain and this neocortex, this developed brain, because of the brain we've inherited and this negative focus of the brain, we can respond to stressful events, something like, your boss at work says, oh, I need that report in by Friday as opposed to a week or two hence. And we can respond in the same way to that as we do to a bear, threatening, if we, ready to jump out on us. We go through the same mind-body responses. And because of the ability to kind of be rational and reflect, that can actually be negative for us, that we can keep thinking about, oh, I've got to do this work, what's going to happen, I'm never going to do it, oh, I'm going to lose my job. And we can stay in that stressed out place. You know, it's a function of this response of the brain, but we can use it, we can respond in ways that keep us stressed out and keep us in this kind of releasing the cortisol and adrenaline, being in this fight or flight mode. And it can be really negative for our health, for our mental health, for our physical health, for our well-being. So we need a way of bringing awareness to that. And this is where mindfulness comes in. Mindfulness is really a way of stepping out of that hypervigilance, out of that fight or flight mode, and just coming back into the present moment. Just we can be aware that we're tense, we're uptight. We can just breathe and then relax. We can notice the thoughts that are coming up in our minds. What if this happened? What if this happened? And we can see them as thoughts that come and go, which is very, very different from when we're having the thoughts and we're treating them as though they're true. Oh, yes, I will get fired. Oh, and then what will happen? I'll lose my job, you know. And if we just let that if we're not aware of our thoughts in that way, then, you know, I like to think, you know, where we'll end up is in a ditch, naked, hungry, alone, being tortured, you know, because the mind can always create worse and worse scenarios, you know, but all we need to do is just bring awareness that this is, you know, these are thoughts, that we don't need to identify with them. Thoughts come and go, bodily experiences come and go. So we need to balance this tendency of the brain to focus on the negative, and mindfulness can really help us break this cycle. And it really is the difference between suffering and freedom. And what the science is telling us is really what the Buddha was teaching 2,500 years ago, which is if we bring awareness to our experience, then we shift. I mean, they're coming to the same conclusion, but different language. But we're shifting awareness to parts of the brain that are focused on well-being, on peace, on happiness, and out of those areas that are focused on stress and anxiety and fear and responding to, you know, in this fearful, anxious way. I want to talk about one other study which I find really fascinating. It was done about 5 years ago. And it was basically what they did was they looked at the brains through functional fMRIs, functional magnetic resonance imaging, looked at the brains of non-meditators, regular folks and meditators. And they looked at what our brains do when we are not focused on a task. So if we were just regular human beings, which we are, but some of us, you know, we do this practice too, we're just folks, and you invited people to sit down for 5 or 10 minutes and not think about anything in particular. What they've found is that our brain goes into a default mode, which is basically one of chatter and distraction. They found we're doing one of 4 things. We're commenting on our experience. It's kind of a narrative. Oh yeah, when I've got, kind of what's going on. It's kind of telling a story to ourselves about what's going on. We're remembering the past, and we're imagining the future. So we're kind of time traveling away from the present moment. We're interpreting things in terms of ourselves. You know, what does this mean for me? And we're thinking of others and ourselves in relation to others. So we're in this kind of cognitive processing, you know, how am I in relation to this other person? And does she like me or does he like me? And, you know, all of this stuff, this kind of conversations we're having, we're in this narrative mode. And they found that being in this narrative mode is actually connected with suffering. It's not a pleasant place to be. It's not a happy place to be. And yet, this is a place we can spend a great deal of our time, kind of in this chatter, distraction mode. And it appears to have had, I mean, there's a reason why we're doing this. They call this the default state. And they speculate that it may have evolved to allow us to live in an increasingly complex world, to solve problems that aren't here yet. So it's not just we're needing to deal with what's here right now. It might be, where did that tiger come from who ate Fred last week? I better steer clear of that area, that processing. And obviously there's a good function in this. But what we're doing is we're spending a lot of time in this mode. The good news, however, though, is that the brain also has another mode, which they call the experiencing mode. This is where we're actually aware of our experience right now. This is really another way of putting it is, this is being mindful of our experience in the present moment. When we're in the experiencing mode, different parts of the brain are being activated, connected with awareness of our senses, awareness of our emotions. It's like right this moment we could be, you could be kind of thinking about, what am I going to do later this evening? What am I going to do next week? Or you could be, okay, I'm aware of my body, I'm aware of what I'm hearing, I'm taking in things, I'm here, or else I'm somewhere else. And they found that it's possible to train this experiencing mode in just 8 weeks of meditation. So we can train this part of our awareness, this being present in just 8 weeks. And that, as I mentioned before, that through meditation, through the practice of mindfulness, we actually we change the brain. It becomes thicker, and new neurons are created, and those areas connected with well-being and happiness are strengthened. So different parts of the brain are activated when we're in this direct experience mode. I won't go into the different parts, but what they found is that meditation seems to lead to 3 changes. We can recover more quickly from when we're in that distracted mode. We can catch ourselves more quickly as well. So we can kind of see, oh, there I am. I'm caught up in that story, in that narrative, and then come back more quickly. They've also found that meditators spend more time in the experiencing mode in daily life. So more time in the present moment. And when we're in this present moment awareness, we're more peaceful and we're more happy. And as I mentioned, meditation seems to strengthen areas of the brain that help create this experiential state. So these two modes, and we can experience it in meditation. It's what we do when we say, okay, bring awareness to your breath or to the sounds or bodily sensations. And then notice when you're somewhere else. Notice when you're, planning what you're going to watch on TV when you get home, or what you're going to do at work tomorrow, or, think about what happened earlier today. And it's not a problem that we go into this mode, but it's helpful and healthy and beneficial not to spend our lives in that mode, but to actually come back and be present with our experience as it is. One of the things they found in doing studies of Buddhist meditators is they were less likely to be shocked, flustered, surprised, or as angry compared to other people. Studies also showed that meditators' brains linked to positive emotions, self-control, and temperament were constantly lit up, not just when they were meditating. So if you meditate on a regular basis, your brain will be lighting up those areas connected with positive emotions, and positive experiences will be lit up even when you're not meditating. So Richie Davidson, who's one of the leading researchers in this whole area of neuroscience, he says people are not just stuck at their respective set points. We can take advantage of our brain's plasticity and train it to enhance these qualities. So this is basically saying what the Buddha has been saying, that we can train our minds, we can change our brains, that we can live more happily by cultivating this ability to be present, this quality of being here now. I want to just mention one more study, because I found this one really quite a fun one. This is how they found that Buddhist meditators, and meditators in general, I think, use different areas of the brain than other people when confronted with unfair choices, enabling them to make decisions rationally rather than emotionally. This was a study that came out about a year ago. It begins, if a friend or relative won $100 and then offered you a few dollars, would you accept this windfall? So they've won $100, or they've, and then they say, here's $3, here's $5, would you accept it? The logical answer would seem to be, sure, why not? But human decision-making does not always appear rational. So they did this study. They found that only about a quarter of us would say, sure, I'll accept the money. The rest would say, no, that's not fair. You've got lots of money. You're giving me $3 out of $100? That's not fair. And they may turn down the money completely, unless they are Buddhist meditators. In which case, whether it's fair or not, more than half will take what is offered. Isn't that interesting? So it's quite a difference. It's a difference between a quarter and a half. So they did these studies, I mean, fascinating studies. They did this game where somebody had $20 and could say to somebody, to their partner, I'm going to give you $10 of my $20. Now, probably everybody, almost everybody would say, yeah, it seems fair. I'll take the $10. But what about if it's $5 or $3? You know, they found real differences. Many people, non-meditators, 3/4 of them, when you reach a certain point, will say, that's not fair. I'm not accepting anything. Now you say, well, isn't that crazy? You know, why wouldn't you accept something rather than nothing? But what they've found is that a certain part of the brain gets activated. It's called the Anterior Insula, and it's been linked to the emotion of disgust. This gets activated in these kind of situations. And what they found is that the Anterior Insula activity was higher for unfair offers. So if you were offered $1 out of $20, then for most people, this part of the brain connected with disgust would get activated. How dare you offer me $1 out of $20? And that the level of activation of this part of the brain predicted the likelihood of an offer being rejected. So if this was being fired up, the chances are that the person who's had this the insula activated would likely say, no, that's outrageous that you'd offer me $1 out of $20 or $2 out of $20. However, in meditators, the anterior insula showed no significant activation for unfair offers. So what's happening is meditators are able to uncouple the negative emotional response to an unfair offer, they say presumably by attending to internal bodily states. So rather than being activated and saying, this is outrageous, it's almost like that gets uncoupled. It's like when we get caught up in a strong emotion, being able to uncouple the bodily sensations and the thoughts from that strong story that we're caught up in. And that's really what we're doing in meditation. We're doing this uncoupling. The Buddha put it this way. He said, in the seen, let there just be the seen. In the heard, just the heard. In the understood, just the understood. That we're kind of uncoupling our experiences rather than having them all like glommed together. How dare you do this? And reactivity and frustration and annoyance and all of that coming up. So this study says when assessing unfair offers, meditators seem to activate an almost entirely different network of brain areas than do the rest of folks. Sorry, I've gone on a little bit long on this, but what I want to do to conclude in the last 2 minutes is to say both the Buddha's teachings and the neuroscience, the more recent neuroscience, says we can train our minds, we can change our brains, that mindfulness and meditation are very helpful ways of training the mind, of shifting the focus of our brains, moving into the calm side of our nervous system from the fight or flight mode, activating areas of the brain associated with ease and well-being, and deactivating the areas connected with stress and anxiety. So that training the mind leads to greater happiness and well-being, less stress, and less suffering. So in this season of storms and elections, the practice of mindfulness can be a great support, helping us come back to the present moment, calming the nervous system, changing our brains, seeing the possibility of alternate courses of action that lead to greater happiness, being able to choose, because we see clearly that we have a choice in this moment. And we can open ourselves to joy, to love, to connection that can only be experienced in the present moment. And we can cultivate qualities that lead to freedom, to an end to suffering. And so I would like to encourage you to cultivate these qualities of presence, of mindfulness, of compassion, perhaps particularly in these days where there's so many things that are kind of pulling us into the fight or flight mode, to judgment, to activation, and to see that in any moment we can bring awareness to our experience and we can find a way out of suffering. So thank you for your kind attention, for your presence this evening. I hope your candidate wins the election, whoever it is. I hope you find peace even if she or he doesn't.